third episode of the Makers and Mentors in Conversation with series. If you've seen our previous episodes, you'll know that I'm Emma Foster, Development Director at Mount Anvil, and the lucky host of our series, which has allowed me to meet some wonderful, interesting and truly insightful figures in our industry recently. So far, I've spoken about the importance of women within the built sector, their contributions and diversity of thought with Gabrielle Appiah and Zoe Ellis-Moore, and how we attract talent much earlier by changing stereotypes and myth-busting from the outset with Sarah Hayford and Anu Manthri. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by two more fantastic peers, Priya Shah, founder of Bayman Property, and Kush Rawal, Residential Development Director at Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing Association. And we'll be chatting about the need for ethnic diversity in the built environment. So welcome both of you, thanks for joining me. How are you guys and how have you found things during the last year in the pandemic?
Yeah, good. I mean, it's great to be back in town. It's great to see a bit of a buzz going on. It's clearly been a challenge. We've had to adapt to doing things very differently at very quick speed. But yeah, looking forward to the light at the end of the tunnel very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really well, thanks. And yeah, thanks for bringing me on your show. Really excited to be here. In terms of the last year, it's been quite enlightening for me. I think overnight we went from working in the office, working long hours, often burning out, to going home and actually seeing that it is possible to work from home. I feel like prior to that point of March 26th when we all went home, everyone did the odd working from home, had a doctor's appointment, got to work at home. But all of a sudden we shifted and it was completely transformational. I've really enjoyed it. I've been having daily walks, going to the gym, cooking more, really exploring my local area. I've loved working from home, and I'm really glad that we're at, the light at the end of the tunnel is here. Sadly, not for many other countries around the world, but things are looking up, and it is nice to have that hybrid working now. I do like coming into the office, actually wearing some of my work clothes, but it's still nice to be at home and to embrace that working from home as well.
I think it's going to be almost quite a challenge to see how everyone settles back into, everyone calls it the new normal really. There's been benefits and disbenefits I think from working from home. Mm-hmm. What do you see as being the challenges?
I think one of the biggest challenges is the digital divide. I don't think everyone has fantastic broadband or internet access at home. Clearly we've seen that homeschooling can be a challenge if you've got parental responsibilities. For some ethnic minority communities, if you're living in a multi-generational household, you've got grandparents living at home, or you've got other members of the family, parents, siblings, that can be challenging as well. Not just the fact that you've got lots of people in the house, which can be quite conflicting, but also just sharing and fighting for that broadband as well. Not all of us have fibre broadband or the same bandwidth that we get in the office at home. So I think that has been one of the biggest challenges, and just being away and feeling that disconnect from the office, but particularly for younger people and those who've just started out in their careers, it can be really challenging because you're missing out on that all important networking, those extracurricular activities, those conversations by the water tap. That's probably one of the biggest challenges, I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree with you in terms of that learning experience,
yeah.
And also never having to say again, you're on mute.
Yeah.
I'd say a bit of a generational divide that emerged. I mean, I've got two young kids. For me, it's been pretty fantastic, being able to be around them, see them. Times I'd never be able to see them the way I am at the moment. But we've got a lot of younger members of staff who are living in shared accommodation, having that defined space where they can set up work and get away from things is hard. And for those people it has been a particular challenge. And I think there's also one other area that's really come to light from my point of view. We've employed people during the period, trying to onboard them effectively, bring them into our culture, bring them into an understanding of our way of doing things. It's so much more difficult doing it the way we are at the moment. Now, I'm sure over time we'll work out ways that we can enhance it, but for me there's nothing like the richness of actually being in front of someone, talking to them and having that dialogue the way we are right now.
I'd agree. Yeah. So Priya, you started Bayman Property after learning that only 1.2% of employees in the built environment were from a BAME background. 3 years on, what are the barriers and why isn't the industry reflective of the cities that we serve?
So I think just before I answer that question, it's really worth giving that disclaimer on the term BAME, because I think there's been a lot of discussion about it. There's some controversies around it. We even had the recent government race report recommend that we completely scrap the term BAME, and I think I've obviously set up an organisation with the term BAME. I do have to give this disclaimer, and I would say that Black, Asian, minority, ethnicity probably isn't the best term. It's an umbrella term. It's an all-encompassing term, which is quite easy to bring into everyday terminology. But I think what we'll find, and hopefully we'll be having a discussion about this, is that most of the differences are actually between ethnicities as opposed to these umbrella terms. So yeah, hopefully we'll revisit that later, but I felt like I had to get that disclaimer out there.
Mary?
And I would say I set up BAME and Property a few years ago because in the work that I do, which is comms and engagement, so helping quite large developers just like yourself and many others get planning permission, a lot of our work in the engagement space is going out into communities, and in London, where it's particularly diverse, nearly 45% of Londoners classify as ethnic minority. We just weren't seeing very diverse engagement strategies. The project teams that I was working in weren't particularly diverse. The client side wasn't very diverse, and this very much dictated how we would go out and engage. It was very much about developers presenting their ideas to communities as opposed to asking them, what would you like to see? What is important to you? Why, tell us about your local area. And I think that just kept being missed. So that was one of the reasons why. Then, seeing that networking events weren't very diverse. I once went to an event which had an all-white male panel, which was just shocking. This was only 5 or 6 years ago, when there could have at least been gender balance. But it was really disappointing to see, completely white male panel. I got called an Indian princess by one of my former clients, which was just shocking. Even taken out of context, it was just really disappointing to hear that they didn't even know me and they were saying things like that. So I think that, inspired me to create BAME and Property, to create that safe, comfortable space for ethnic minorities to come and network together. I think a few years later, we are seeing considerable progress with regards to diversity. Companies are taking it more seriously, not just with regards to having it in their quotas, for example, but also just how they recruit. So, starting to go into schools and starting that recruitment process a little bit earlier. Thinking about how they can support, colleagues from underrepresented backgrounds more in the working environment. All of these things have made a difference, but perhaps COVID has taken that progress just that step backwards. Let's see.
Well, that's interesting because we've done a fair amount of consultations during the pandemic. And as you guys have said, in terms of working practices, we've had to completely pivot how we do it. But one of the really interesting things we've seen through some of the social mapping that we've done is actually a much greater level of engagement from those minorities that we were struggling to engage with, which has been really refreshing because it's sort of taken you away from, as you said, more of a standard approach to really being creative with it. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that one develops post pandemic if we get there. Kush, do you have anything to add to that?
From where I'm sitting, I've been in the sector for 15 odd years, and I've had those moments where you turn up to an event and you look around and there is some difference there, and you know the difference and you feel it, and you do think, how far have we got? And as one example, there's a particular award ceremony, and I won't name names here, but we might know what I'm talking about, and I've been there pretty much every year it's been running. And seeing the slow but eventual progress we've seen there, just in terms of acknowledgement that our sector, what we do, and the communities we serve are diverse, and therefore the people that are actually doing that work, having a diverse group delivering makes sense. That for me has been a little bit of a flag bearer, that there is change happening there. And I know it might seem bizarre the way I'm drawing parallel there, but for me, I just remember going to that event first time and just feeling very, very uneasy to a degree, just thinking, why is it like this? It can and should be different.
I can certainly, from my own experience through my career so far, remember at the start being the only woman in the room, and now when I go to, you know, our team is exceptionally diverse in terms of gender balance, the awards ceremonies, as you say, there are a lot more women, so it's really encouraging that there has been a shift in that respect. Now it's the next stage, how do we improve it further? So Kush, the key is really harnessing lived experience to add to how we develop homes, communities and opportunities. And I read a comment piece of yours in Inside Housing about why you're so passionate about shared housing, as it was your parents and then your route to home ownership. So why do you think personal experience is so important, and what do you think you give to your role from lived experience?
Really good question. I'll give you a very quick abridged version of like why I'm here and, you know, where I've come from. So mum and dad grew up in East Africa. At a very young age, I had to leave due to difficulties. Came over, typical immigrant story with the shirt on the back. Indians have a bit of a habit of sort of clubbing together and buying property. So all members of the extended family put whatever money they had, bought a property in Kingston, and there were 20 of us living there. And I know in current times you think of 20 people and you think about those shows where you have those, you know, people living on match. It wasn't like that, but it was difficult. And, you know, as a family of four, me, my young brother, mum and dad, living in a single room, it wasn't conducive to giving us the best upbringing that they could. And mum and dad knew that, and they looked at different ways of moving on from that situation. Dad had a blue-collar work, you know, job, so not a massive income. My mum was training to be an accountant, so again, not much money coming through. But at that time, the government were releasing different home ownership schemes. They qualified, and that gave them a foothold on the property ladder. And genuinely, without a doubt, I can say if we didn't have that help, and if that intervention didn't happen, my life story probably would be very, very different, right? It gave me confidence, it gave my brother confidence, it gave my mum and dad the ability for their relationship to flourish. And that lived experience of the impact a home can have on a family, on outcomes, is central to my upbringing and the way I look at life. If I look at my employer, you know, if it's okay, I'd say a little bit about Metropolitan Thames Valley, because I think there's a real thread around what we're talking about today. And they were set up over half a century ago. They saw inequality in society. We had a lot of people coming over from the Caribbean to help build our country following the war. And people were living in abhorrent conditions. People weren't willing to rent them a property, and the properties that were being rented were pretty poor. And it took the actions of one lady who saw this as a problem, took that as a cause, and had the compassion to drive that forward, that has built what is now a national organisation that not only looks to address the housing inequality in society, but general inequalities that exist there. And that, for me, just chimes so much with my lived experience, and being able to be part of something like that. It's more of a movement than just there to build a home is quite important to me.
Absolutely. That's why we love being your partners in delivering those homes. Priya, Kush mentioned the example of the awards ceremony. Can you think of a time when something's appeared obvious to you, but maybe others in the room haven't thought about it?
I think quite a lot of networking events, especially the award ceremonies, are very much centred around drinking. They can be quite, you know, unsociable hours for some people, and I think not everyone drinks, and we do need to start diversifying our events and moving away from them purely being about alcohol, because a lot of the time at these award ceremonies people do tend to get quite drunk, and I think, you know, that isn't to everyone's taste. It does exclude people who don't drink or don't drink a lot, and I think that's not what we want to achieve in the industry. We want it to be inclusive, and that means, you know, being inclusive in everything that we do, not just in our recruitment processes, but in the extracurricular activities that we do, such as networking and award events. as well. Otherwise, we will be preventing people from attending and enjoying these events who should be there to celebrate their talent, because often it's people who, have actually provided really inspiring ideas, really helped to deliver major projects or outputs that should be in the room, who are often from ethnic minority backgrounds or other underrepresented backgrounds, but they do not want to be in that environment. So I think, there is a time and place for alcohol, definitely at awards, but we need to start thinking about how we diversify our networking and our events, and ensuring that we are speaking to everyone. That's, not just through how we celebrate events or hold events, but thinking about the timings of them. So I think COVID-19 has obviously seen a lot of webinars. Even Bayman Property did some webinars at the beginning. We very quickly stopped them because by that point everyone had had enough of Zoom and Teams. But I think what it allowed was people to just tune into events in their own time, crack on with other things in the background. I was often cooking and just listening to an event in the background. I didn't need to have my video on. Or you sign up to an event, but you can catch it later because it's been recorded. That's fantastic. We shouldn't stop doing that. So I think that's what inclusivity is. And we just need to remember, how do we ensure we're catering for everyone?
Kind of brings to mind the sort of hybrid approach to working moving forward.
Exactly.
It's a hybrid approach to all of the networking stuff as well.
Yeah.
Kush, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I absolutely second the idea that we've got to be inclusive, right? If we want to create an environment where we're bringing the best talent up and giving that opportunity for people to shine and rise, we've got to think that there are lots of different approaches that we can be taking. As an example, we've got a very active and vibrant property market in the Middle East, right? They are not afraid to having networking events. I've been lucky enough to be to one or two, and there's some things that we can learn from more of an international perspective around how do we create this opportunity that doesn't just revolve around drinking. Now, I've got a caveat. I love a drink, and as much as anybody else, but I do think it is right that we should be making space for everybody there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, thinking now then about what needs to be done, as I said earlier, we recently discussed women and young people in the sector, and what more needs to be done to attract and retain talent. The view of those panellists has been that we need to tackle diversity at a much younger age, demonstrating why this is a great industry to be in, and why it's a viable path for so many, regardless of where they're from. Is this something that particularly impacts the BAME community, do you guys think?
Yeah, definitely. I think, from a very young age, certain communities, thinking about Indians or Nigerians, for example, from a very young age, we are very much influenced by our parents and our communities, and there are certain professions that we are encouraged to go into. I mean, my own father wanted me to be a pharmacist, and I said no. He didn't really like that. Now he doesn't mind. But it just goes to show not everyone has the confidence to actually stand up to the parents and say, no, I don't want to do this. I'm going to create my own path. Other very common professions within our communities is accounting and finance, medicine, dentistry, occasionally law, and it just goes to show that we're very much siloed into a very narrow career path. But I think part of the problem is that our parents don't know that quite an array of careers exist in the built environment and property and housing, and you don't know what you don't know. So I think part of the parcel is actually speaking to parents as well, and that's where when you're speaking to young people at the age, between the ages of 14 to 16, you're also targeting their parents and actually saying, have you thought about real estate development? Have you thought about working for a housing association? So that's one of the reasons. I also think we need to completely change the narrative around housing and stop talking about bricks and mortar, but actually housing is far more than just that. It's to do with health justice, it's to do with race, it's about climate change, it's about absolutely everything. We're just not making it sound very sexy. So I think by changing that, we will start to attract people who are, pioneers in their own communities and can actually make that transformation and that change within our sector as well.
I think, you make a really good point there. We need a call to arms, right? The last year has shown us the importance of home and what an impact it has on our lives. And that whole idea that you can weave in a whole load of other challenges that we've got in society to trying to deal with this one is such an important narrative. And we haven't got it right. We haven't got that story out there the way it needs to be.
And it's about those those impacts on people's lives. I mean, as you were saying, Kush, if your parents hadn't had that opportunity, would you have ended up where you are today? I challenge you slightly, Priya, in terms of getting into children at sort of teenage years. I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, God help me. And even when my 8-year-old was 4, she was very clear, there's a fireman, a policeman, a dinner lady, and it was like, you know, I work in development and construction. How can my 4-year-old be so straight down the line in terms of these are the gender roles? So I feel that it's even earlier than those teenage years. And it's one of the reasons we sort of started Makers and Mentors, was to show the plethora of careers that we have available in our industry, as opposed to just what people would associate with development and construction.
But it's the books we read to our children when they're growing up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my daughter, who's now 8, I remember a few years back, we had a whole host of different strong women leaders coming into the school, talking about their careers and really adding that inspiration around this is, you know, the options that exist out there. We're talking about the challenges to the BAME community, but equally, if we look at our particular sector, the gender challenge there is just as acute. The challenge to get new, fresh blood into some of these more technical roles that we absolutely need is there. So, you know, from purely a selfish view of how do we keep supply going, how do we really meet those objectives, widening that pool of people who are going to be coming to us saying, I want a job, is so important.
Absolutely.
I would also add to that is recognising where people from, you know, certain underrepresented backgrounds who haven't traditionally gone into the built environment or careers in construction planning, whatever, need that extra support. So, you know, that's why you get lots of diversity at the graduate and the entry level, because they don't really know what's in store for them. But as soon as you hit the middle management level, you start to see, you know, people from ethnic minority backgrounds, women, other underrepresented backgrounds just start to leave the industry. And then you have the usual, you know, sort of white middle class people continuing with their careers, and that's why you see complete lack of visibility at the top. But it's recognising where they might need that extra support, where they've not had those conversations or those networking experiences, those extracurricular activities, and actually, you know, starting to provide them with a bit more of a tailored program and mentoring. I should say that's why mentoring is so important, because some people just need it more than others. They don't naturally, you know, have all those connections and just that knowledge of the industry, and that's the only way to help them to continue and to progress in their careers and also to retain that talent.
There's an interesting layer to this, I think, which, if I may, I think might be worth exploring, right? We talk about the inequality around BAME and absolutely the focus that needs to be there. But Priya, you also talked to the fact that, you know, coming from an Indian background, you know, the focus from your parents around this is the sort of route to go down. For me, there's an emerging bigger issue that I see, right, and it's my own personal view, and it is one of social inequality. And that's not always about the colour of your skin. It's more about the education of your parents. It's more about your education opportunity. It's about how rich your parents are. And it's that economic inequality that exists. So we operate all over London. And about half of our client group are BME. But we're also seeing those same challenges that we talked to about the BME coming to those people on those lower incomes. And we need to not forget that there's a much broader set of people that are being excluded from society, from opportunity, and how do we create inclusivity for all of those people? And yeah, welcome both your views on that, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that's why looking at ethnicities individually is perhaps more, you know, important and effective than talking about BAME as a whole, because, you know, generally black people tend to go into social housing far more than some members of the South Asian community. Indians have the highest home ownership in this country, surpassing white British people, which just goes to show that it's completely different, you know, mentality and culture and just economic status, which is there. You could get a very wealthy Indian who is doing very well in their lives, but put them next to a, you know, kind of white person who's grown up on a council estate, their lives are going to be very different, the opportunities are going to be very different. So I think, yeah, absolutely looking at it from a social inequality perspective is really important as well.
So I guess a question to start with you guys would be, how did you start your careers? And probably what would be the one piece of advice that you would give your younger self now?
Okay, yeah. So for me, I did politics at university, and I always thought I would go down the international development route, but I was quite keen to find a graduate job. And I kind of just fell into planning and engagement, not really knowing what it was. It's very much about local government, engaging with local councils and authorities and helping to get that planning permission over the line. And I actually surprisingly quite enjoyed it because every local authority is different. You're dealing with different politics, you're dealing with different communities. That was really interesting. And yeah, I've kind of just stayed in that career for the last 6 or so years. I took a bit of a break in between where I quit my job and went travelling, which was amazing. That's a story for another time. But actually, it's been really, really interesting. And I think one of the things that I really love about my job is, helping communities shape where they live, and being that effect change. And that comes really hand in hand with the work that I do with BAME and property, which stemmed from seeing lack of diversity in the industry. And that's why diverse engagement is so important. So both of them, really marry up nicely.
And what advice would you give your younger self?
I think I would just say to be more confident with my choices. I think I've always had that self-doubt, which I think is really common for a lot of women. We often have that imposter syndrome, but actually just, go for it sometimes. I do wonder where I would be if I'd just taken some of the decisions that I had thought about but never really, actually progressed with many years ago. So I think just having that confidence to go for it.
Same question to you, Kush.
Yeah, so I'll admit something. I'm one of those people you were talking about earlier, but I wasn't as strong as you. I gave in to societal pressure, parents and family, and I ended up studying for a year at Royal Holloway, and that's a university, not the prison. Right? Sorry. And I studied a subject that was way beyond any interest I had, and I realised that it wasn't for me. So I wasted a year, effectively. And then found a course that I wanted to do. I got onto a graduate placement at an organisation. And a day before I was due to start that placement, my dad saw an advert in the paper. And it was for a job for a company called Thames Valley Housing down the road. And it was paying about £10,000 more than my grad placement. He said, why don't you have a go at that? I said, but Dad, what is it? He goes, it's a job in the council. I said, all right, is it, Dad? Anyway, so I looked into it, found it wasn't the council, it was a housing provider, and I haven't looked back since. So it was purely an accidental point of my dad pointing out there's a job there. But the path that's taken me through has actually been to reconnect. At that point, I didn't really totally understand the journey my parents had been through and the impact that had, having been so young. And the more I've got involved with the direction that organisation and that sector has gone in, it's just made me fall more and more in love with what it is we do, because we have the benefit of working with fantastic commercial partners. We're dealing with the most vulnerable parts of society and public institutions who are looking to address that. And it's something for everyone, I guess. It's the thing that I come away with. And I guess the advice that I would give myself, unsurprisingly, is, when you have that gut feeling and you think, you know what, you're being pushed down a road you don't want to go down, fight it. And you know yourself what's right for you and go with it.
You bring me back. I studied geography the first time I went to uni, and I fought with my dad like there was no business. He was saying, you can't do geography degree, it doesn't lead you to a career, you'll end up doing another one, which is exactly what he did. And exactly what I did, and I now do a very similar job to the job that he's done. That's probably the one time I have stood up for myself. But I totally hear you in terms of imposter syndrome. I think probably the only advice I'd have for anyone starting off is just sort of the decision you make today is the right decision. Don't look back, look forward, and just change it if it's not right. Because I think you can overthink things and you never quite know which is the right way to go. So whichever way you go is the right way. Yep. That would be where I'd go. Priya, you mentioned mentoring, which is close to my heart as part of Makers and Mentors programme. And obviously we're here because of Makers and Mentors. We've launched the mentoring programme because we believed that we could do more in providing an opportunity for all. You've said that you fully support mentoring. How do you think it can improve our sector as a whole?
I think mentoring gives you something which your day-to-day colleagues can't always give you, which is that, you know, that support and that insight about the industry. It's going to them with questions about your future career, you know, where do I see myself in 5 years' time, and them kind of helping you shape that path. Them asking you, how do you want to shape your path? It's very much a conversation about you, and they can also learn so much from you as well. You know, mentoring is completely a two-way process, and we often forget that. So I think it's a real opportunity to just help someone with that extra guidance, which you just may not get in the working environment. And that's why I think it's so important. I've not actually had a mentor myself, and I do often think, you know, it would be so useful to have someone. I just haven't found the right person. I think that is also really important. Pairing people in the right way, making sure that there is some synergy between them, that is really important. So I'm still searching for the right mentor. But I think, you know, once you found that person who can really help you at different stages in your life, you've basically got someone who you can always speak to at, you know, different points in your life as well. And that's what is really important. You don't have to be engaging or talking all the time, but when you do speak, there is you leave that conversation feeling like, oh, you know what, I know where I'm going, I know what I'm doing, I've got so much more to learn. And I think it's very much about growth.
And I think that synergy point you made is really resonates with me. In terms of, I was lucky enough, Geeta did a couple of mentoring sessions with me, and to have someone much more senior than me who's been in the industry and can give you those pointers, but also give you the support. You know, you feel like someone's got your back if you're really pushing yourself to challenge yourself further. I think, what about you, Kush?
Yeah, I think it's really the ability to rise outside of your contextual position, right? So it's not necessarily about hierarchy. It's about the fact that you're in a business. The people, if you go to someone that you work with, the context, their approach, it's very much going to be framed around your shared understanding. Coming out with someone completely different, they're going to view the world differently. They haven't got the same constraints that you're looking at. So where I've been mentored, I've found that particularly helpful in, you know, things that seem like the end of the world from my point of view, given what I was looking at, you know, were really put in perspective by just having someone with a completely different view. And the ability to get that support where you've got the freedom to ask pretty much anything and explore your own thinking in a safe environment, I think is really, really beneficial.
I think as well also, I've found it helpful in terms of balancing both professional pressures or professional quandaries that you need to solve with the personal as well. So, you know, something that deals with exactly the type of experience that you're living as opposed to just your work experience or your home experience. That'd be it for me. What's been the best lesson you've learned, do you think, from formal or informal mentoring that you can pass on?
So where I've mentored or been mentored?
Either way.
So you might not pick this up, but I do talk quite a bit. And actually, I've found the experience of mentoring just really valuable in honing in my own skills of listening more. And I know that's pretty basic, but for me that was such a valuable thing that I took away from it, is just how do I create that space? And I've been able to take what I've learnt there and implant some of that learning with my own team, with my peers, you know, and it's helped me in my own career. So I think listening has been a big thing for me.
Priya, in terms of informal mentoring, what lessons have you learned that you would pass on?
Sure. So just before I started Bayman Property, I had a number of conversations with industry professionals just to understand, you know, how do you start a network? One of them was Charlotte Morford, who I'm sure many of you know. She's phenomenal. She, you know, set up Women in Planning all across the country, and I essentially asked her, how did you do it? You know, what did you do? What are the things that I should avoid? You know, how do you manage your work responsibilities on a day-to-day basis and running a network? Because it is challenging, and it's still a challenge, how, you know, having to manage everything with multiple priorities, but it's also been a huge learning curve for me. And in my time of running Bayman Property, I have met so many inspiring individuals at different levels of their careers. So, you know, CEOs who've approached me for help, and I never thought that would happen, you know, in my mid-20s, to, you know, really, really young people who've just started out in their career. And in a way, I've indirectly had that opportunity to learn from others, whilst also, you know, pass on that wisdom to younger people who are entering the industry. So it's been an all-round really, you know, fun experience as well.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. Obviously, in terms of makers and mentors, one of the strands that we've launched is our mentoring approach, and I'm afraid I'm going to ask you both. Would you consider signing up to be a mentor, and even to looking for your own mentor through the website?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
What do you think mentoring would do for you personally and for others?
I think it would really help me to understand where I'm going to go over the next few years in my career. You know, I've been incredibly fortunate to have set up a very successful network, and now it's at that stage where I'm thinking, well, what is the next stage for that network? How do I manage that, that responsibility with my day-to-day work, which I really enjoy. So I think having a mentor would really help me with just, managing my priorities, understanding where I want to go, and just thinking about all the things that I'm doing in my personal life as well. How do you manage everything? So I think that would really be helpful for me.
Okay.
Yeah, to help me grow and, in the right ways, and expand my ambition. I've been, as I said, in the sector for 15 years, had a great career so far. Hopefully another 15, 20, 30 years, whatever's going in front of me. But how do I make the best out of those opportunities and really grow and be the best person I can?
Awesome. Thank you both very much for joining me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.